Hello, this is Jared from LearnToDroid.com. In today's tutorial, I'll show you how to create an Android app that uses the model view ViewModel design pattern along with the Firebase Authentication library to manage the login and registration and logout of users. Before we get started, I'll do a quick demonstration of this app. So the user can fill out the email address and password to create a new user using the Firebase Authentication platform. Select the register button, and what it's done is it will automatically navigate you to another fragment which shows which user has been logged in. If I select the logout button, it will take me back to the login screen, and now I can try to log in with incorrect credentials. Enter droid@gmail.com, password. This will fail, login failure. And if I correct this and I select the login button, it will process the login successfully and take me back to the fragment. Now, as I mentioned, we'll be using the MVVM or model view ViewModel design pattern when creating this app. Now, the reason why we want to do this is MVVM makes it very easy to separate the concerns of the different parts of your Android project into different classes. So it makes it very maintainable and easy to read. In MVVM, the model is made up of data models, business logic, and application data. The view is the structure of the layout and the appearance of what the user will see in the UI of your app. And the view model is used by the views to transform the data in the model to display in the view. We will use two different Jetpack architecture components in this tutorial. We'll make use of the live data architecture component and the view model architecture component. So let's get started. We'll create a new Android project now. So for the name, we'll use Firebase Auth login register MVVM. And we'll select finish. So what we'll do now is we'll create a fragment for displaying the login and registration form. We'll call it login register fragment. And this will extend fragment, and we'll override the two methods, on create and on create view. Next, what we'll do is we'll create a fragment layout resource file. This fragment layout resource file will be called fragment_login register. And then go OK. So now I'm just going to copy over the fragment layout resource code. Okay, so it's pretty simple stuff. It's a linear layout. Inside that linear layout with a vertical orientation, we've got two edit texts, one for capturing the email address and the next one for capturing the password. They've got different input types so that the password gets hidden. Then we've got two buttons, one for login and one for registration. So we'll update this login register fragment class to use this fragment layout resource. And just will return this view. We'll also need to import a few dependencies in the Gradle files. We'll need to import the navigation architecture component for managing navigation within the app, and we'll also pull in the dependencies for Firebase Authentication so we can use that in our app. So let's open the build.gradle file first in the app section. First thing I'll do is I'll copy over the dependencies for the navigation architecture component. After that, I'll follow the setup instructions to retrieve the dependencies for Firebase in our Android project. So in the project level build.gradle file, we'll need to make a couple of changes. We'll need to add the following line. So I'll open the build.gradle file at the project level, and I'll include this dependency. After that, I'll update the app level build.gradle file to apply the plugin. And I'll pull in two dependencies for Firebase into this app level build.gradle file. One for Firebase Analytics and the other for Firebase Auth. Now I'll sync the project with Gradle and pull in all those dependencies. Okay, because we're using the navigation architecture component, I'll need to update the activity layout resource file to include a fragment. So I'll paste this layout resource file in here. Okay, so I've just pasted the code into the main activity layout resource file. This has got a fragment inside it. This is used by the navigation architecture component. And now I'll need to create a navigation graph. Right click on the resources directory, select new Android resource file. For the resource type, we'll select navigation, and for the file name, I'll give it navgraph. And now we've got a blank navigation graph, and I'll add one destination for the login register fragment. Next, what we'll do is we'll create the Firebase project in the web browser. We'll select Add Project, and we'll fill in a name for that project. We'll select Continue, and we'll select Continue again. We'll pick a Google Analytics account to use, and select Create Project. Once it's created, we'll select Continue, and we'll access that project. And then we'll follow the setup instructions for Android. We'll enter the package name that we used. We'll give the app a nickname that will show on the Firebase console. And we'll also get a SHA-1 signing certificate from Gradle. So we'll access the Gradle tab, then we'll go into Tasks, then we'll go into Android, then we'll select the signing report, then we'll get that SHA-1 key there, copy that, and paste that into the Firebase console and select Register App. Then we'll download that Google Services JSON file, which has various API keys in there. Then we'll need to copy that JSON file into the app directory. And then we can run our app to test it out. Once you run your app, wait for your app to communicate with the Firebase servers. Once that has happened, this section will be completed and you can continue to the console. Now select the Continue to the Console button. Now we'll go into the authentication section and we'll select Setup Sign-In Method. Enable the email and password option and select Save. Next, what we'll do is we'll set up the ViewModel and the repository for the login register fragment class. Go create new Java class. We'll call it login register ViewModel, and this will extend Android ViewModel. And we will create the default constructor that has the application as a parameter. Now we'll create the repository class. We'll call it app repository. And now we'll set up the structure of the packages for this project. So we'll create one package for views. In the views package, we'll place the main activity and the login register fragment in that package. Now we'll create a package for model, and we'll place the app repository in that model package, and we'll create the ViewModel package. In the ViewModel package, we'll place the login register ViewModel class. In the app repository class, we'll set up a constructor, and we'll take an application as a parameter. We'll add a variable to the app repository for storing the application. And we'll set that in the constructor. In the app repository class, we'll have a method for registering the user. Public void register. This will take two parameters, the email address and the password. Now, in order to share information between the view, the view model, and the repository, we'll be using live data to do this. Live data is a Jetpack architecture component, and more specifically, we'll be using mutable live data because this data can change over time. So we'll create a new variable. This will be mutable live data, and it will contain a Firebase user. Okay, and I'll call it user mutable live data. And in the repository constructor, I will default this to a blank mutable live data. So we'll also need to initialize a Firebase Auth variable in the constructor. So we'll add that as a variable to the class. And in the constructor, we will get the instance of the Firebase Authentication. We will use this for registering and signing in the user. Now we can start implementing the register method, where we will use the Firebase SDK for Firebase Authentication to register the user. And then once we've registered the user, we will send that Firebase user back to the view model, which will take it to the view as well, containing the Firebase user record. So let's implement this now. In the register method, we'll use the Firebase Auth variable, and then we'll invoke the create user with email and password method. So we'll pass the email and password as parameters. Then we'll add an on-complete listener. Okay. In the on-complete listener, we will use the application to get the main executor. Then we'll add an on-complete listener. In the on-complete method, we'll check if the task was successful. And if it was, we'll update the live data. We'll get the user mutable live data and set the value using post value. To get the user to provide to the post value method, we'll use the Firebase Auth.getCurrentUser. If this has failed, we can show a toast message with the exception. Registration failed. So now we'll update the ViewModel class to make use of the register method. So now I'll implement the login register ViewModel class. So we've extended the Android ViewModel and we've implemented the default constructor where we're taking the application as a parameter. So now we'll create a reference to the repository. We'll create a variable for this first. Then we'll initialize this variable in the constructor. And we'll pass the application as a parameter. Next, we'll implement the register method on the register view model. Public void register. It will contain two parameters, one for the email address and one for the password. Then we'll simply invoke this method on the app repository class by calling register and providing the email and the password. And we'll need a way to get the live data into the ViewModel class. So we'll create a new variable for the mutable live data that will contain the Firebase user, and we'll call it the user mutable live data. So in the constructor, we will need to set up the usable mutable live data to get that information from the repository. Before we can do that, we'll need to create a getter for the mutable live data in the repository class. Okay, now we'll jump back into the view model. Then we'll set up the user mutable live data. Now we'll create a getter inside the login register view model so we can expose this user mutable live data to the view. So now we'll start implementing the functionality of this app. So in the login register fragment, we've got a button for registering the user, and we've got some edit text for capturing the email address and the password. So what we want to do first is implement the registration function. So we'll set up the variables for the edit text and the button. I've just copied those over, and then we'll, in the onCreateView method, use the find view by ID to set up those variables. So next we'll create an on-click listener for the register button. So we'll need to create a new variable for the login register view model. So now we'll set up the login register view model variable in the onCreate method. So we'll need to import the lifecycle extension. So to connect the view model variable, we need to use ViewModelProviders.of, pass in the fragment, and then use the get method and pass in the class name for the view model. Next, what we'll do is we'll set up an observer on the mutable live data inside the view model so that we can watch for changes, so that when a login or a registration happens, we can get that user record into the view. Now we'll be using this in the view to then navigate to the next screen now that we've got a successful user that's logged in. So let's set up the observer. So we'll get the view model, then we'll get the user mutable live data, then we will observe. In the onChange method, we will check that the Firebase user is not null. So this means there's a real user. And if that's the case, we will just create a toast message saying that the user's been created. One last thing we'll need to do is in the onClick listener, on the register button, we'll need to invoke the view model. We'll get the view model, and then we'll call the register method, and then we'll need to pass in the email and the password. So we can get those as strings. Check that both these strings have been populated. And if that's the case, we'll invoke the register method. Okay, so now we can test this out. So before we create a user, I'm just showing you in the Firebase console, I've currently got no users created. Okay, so let's create a new user. Enter droid1@gmail.com, password, and we'll call the register method. It says the user's been created. Now if we go into the Firebase console and then we hit the reload, we can see a new record's just been created for this user. So next we'll implement the login functionality. So we'll hop in the app repository and we'll create a new method for the login. Public void login. We'll pass in email and password. So we use the Firebase Auth object and select the sign in with email and password method. And we'll provide an email and the password. And we'll set an add-on complete listener. We'll use the application get main executor. Then we'll add a new onComplete listener auth result. So in the onComplete method, we will check if the task is successful. And if so, we will provide the user to the user mutable live data. We'll just copy this from above. So if it's not successful, we'll show a toast message. And we'll use that, copy that from above as well in the register method. And we'll say login failed. And it will show the exception as well. So now we'll make some changes to the view model. And we'll add one more method for login. And just like the register method, we will invoke the login method of the app repository, passing the email and the password as parameters. Next, we'll jump into the Fragment class. And we want to set up the login button to invoke the login method on the view model. So we'll go into the onCreateView method. We'll go login button and we'll add a onClick listener. And we'll grab the email and the password the same way we did before. And we'll check the length of those strings. And if they're both greater than 0 characters long, we will invoke the login method on the view model, passing in the email and the password. So if the user does successfully log in, what we want to do is we want to take them to a new location, a new fragment within the app. And in that fragment, we want to show the user's email address and a button to log out. So let's implement that now. So we'll create a new fragment called logged in fragment, which extends fragment. And we'll set up this fragment to override the onCreate method and the onCreateView method. And now we'll need to create a fragment layout resource. We'll call this logged in fragment. Okay, so this has a text view and a button in it. The text view will display the current user that's logged in, and the button is a logout button, so when selected it will log the user out. So now we'll update the logged in fragment to make use of this fragment layout resource. return this view. And we'll add this fragment to the navigation graph. And we'll set up a connection between the login register fragment and the logged in fragment. So now complete the implementation of the login function on the login register fragment. So what we were trying to do before is navigate the user to the new fragment if they've successfully logged in. Now this will also happen if the user has successfully created a new account. So to do this, we will rely on this observer for observing the user live data. So if the user that comes back from the live data is not null, instead of showing this toast, what we want to do instead is navigate that user to the new fragment. And we'll do this navigation using the navigation architecture component from Jetpack. So now we can test this out. I'll type in a user that I've already created. Give it a password. Then I'll select the login button. And it's taken me to the new fragment. It's not currently showing the logged in user though, so we'll implement that next. So what we'll show in this fragment is the email address of the user that's currently logged in. In addition to that, we'll also need to build the functionality for logging out the user. So let's start with that first. So we'll jump into the app repository and we'll create the new method for logging out the user. Public void logout. Okay, and we'll use the Firebase Auth to invoke the sign out method. Now we also want to have a new piece of mutable data to indicate whether the user is logged out or not. So this will be a Boolean piece of data and it will be called logged out mutable live data. This will be initialized in the constructor as well. So in addition to invoking the sign out method on the Firebase Auth object, I also want to update the live data with the value of true to indicate that it's been logged out. So now we want to update the view model to make use of this logout method on the repository. So now we need to create a new view model so we can make use of the logout method on the app repository. So I'll create a new Java class and I'll give it the name of logged in view model. This will extend Android view model and we'll create the constructor that uses the application. So we'll add a variable for the app repository to this class. And we'll set up the app repository variable in the constructor. Next, we'll set up the references to the mutable live data in the logged in view model. So we'll create the first mutable live data referring to the Firebase user. User mutable live data. And the second mutable live data that relates to a Boolean value if the user is logged out or not. Okay, we'll set that up in the constructor by using the getters on the app repository. We'll need to add a getter in the repository for the logged out mutable live data. Then we'll add getters to both these in the view model as well. Next, we'll add a method to call the Logout method in the repository. Public void Logout. And we'll call the Logout method that's on the app repository. Now we can make the changes to the logged in fragment to show the current user in the text view and to set up the button to log out the user when selected. So we'll create attributes for the text view and for the button. Text view is for the logged in user text view. There's a button for the log out. And then we'll set those up in the onCreateView method. Next, we'll add a variable for the view model. Then we'll set up that view model in the onCreateView method. And then we'll just provide the correct class name, which is logged in view model. Next, we'll set an observer on the user live data from the logged in view model. If Firebase user is not null, we will update the text view with logged in user and pass in the email address of the user. So next we'll add a listener to the logout button. Set onClick listener, new onClick listener. And then we'll use the view model to invoke the logout functionality. Finally, we'll add another observer to check for the logged out status. So we'll get the logged out immutable live data and add an observer. We'll change the boolean to say logged out. And if that's true, then we want to navigate the user back to the initial form. Now to do that, we need to go back into the navigation graph and add a new action to take the user from the logged in fragment to the login register fragment. And we'll copy that ID. And if the user is logged out, then we'll use a navigation architecture component to navigate back to the login form. We'll also need to make an addition to the app repository. In the app repository constructor, we'll also check if the user is currently logged in, and if so, we'll update the mutable live data. So we'll add a if statement, Firebase Auth.getCurrentUser does not equal null. Then we will set the user mutable live data. We'll post a value of the current user. And we'll also update the logged out mutable live data to say that it's false because the user is not logged out. So now we can run this app and we'll log in. And we'll take the user to the fragment, which is currently showing the correct logged in user. So if we select log out, it'll take me back to the login form. Now I can try registering a user as well. I'm going to droid2@gmail.com, password, select register, and that will take me to the new fragment as well, and it will show the up-to-date user. So that's it. Thanks everyone for watching this tutorial. I've included some links in the description if you want to get a hold of the code samples. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks very much.